Okay, like I said a little bit earlier, this is going to be a shorter lesson. It's just the way these fell out. We've been averaging. I went back and looked. We've been averaging about an hour, and so I try not to go too much over that. But I honestly don't know how long this one's going to be. It's going to probably be dependent on y'all's comments, and because we're only looking at 10 verses today, and it covers prayer and compassion. Looking at Mark 1, 35 through 45. Did I give notes to everyone? Okay. And so we're going to look at two different sections of Scripture in Mark that we're looking at here. But the main one is looking at prayer, and it's going to look at the prayer from Jesus' perspective, not just how we are to pray and stuff like that. But it is an example. And then the next side of that is we're going to look at Jesus' compassion. And I think, as we're going through this, right, dedicating ourselves to learning more about how Jesus worked and the apostles' teachings and the teachings of Jesus, he's the ultimate example, and he's what we're to look at here. And so this first section, right, is Jesus preaches. The title of it is Jesus preaches throughout Galilee. Maybe they should have picked a little bit of a different title for this section of Scripture. But it really does talk about that. But first, what I want us to look at, right? Verses 35 and really through 38, maybe. Looking at this, I know this is 35 through 39, but I'll read 35, 36, 37, 38 real quick, and then we'll look at some of the notes for that. It says, starting in verse 35, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up, went out to an isolated place to pray. Now, if you remember at the end of last week, he had spoke all day in the synagogue, and then he spent the whole evening healing people. It doesn't say how late into the evening. He didn't start healing people until the sun had gone down, depending on the time of the day. I'm not sure what time it was, but it would have been later in the evening. And then it says the whole town, or a large part of the town, was there to be healed, and he did it on an individual basis. So obviously, he would have probably been pretty tired. But it says here, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up, went out to an isolated place to pray. All right? And so I like this, and we see this on a regular basis, right? And like one of the things that I want us to make sure we look at is Jesus is an example, right? He's who we're to follow, and his example is what we're to follow. And so Jesus regularly found time to get away, to escape, to get into solitude and pray. And it's something that he did on a regular basis. If you actually look through Scripture, we can find 7 different times that is specifically mentioned that he got away and went and prayed. And so if it's Jesus does it, then it's probably really important that we do it on a regular basis. One of the things that we see here, and Luke mentions it, Luke said he did it often. Right? Luke didn't give an account, but Luke mentioned it, that it was something that he did often, that he got away often and prayed. And I would think he would have to, because you've got to think of the weight that was on his shoulders, the ministry that was on his shoulders, what he knew he was, it's still 3 years at this time, I think about 3 years away, was his crucifixion. But, he had a very important thing. And one of the things I've talked about before, I do believe that the healing people, that going through that process was physically taxing on him as well. It just seems that it was something that kind of drained him. And so I think that's important. Now, the flip side of this, which we're going to see in 36 and 37 and 38, is how the rest of the world tends to react when we're trying to find our alone time, right? When we're trying to find that time away to pray or to speak with God. We see in verse 36, later Simon and the others went out to find him. I was like, where's this guy at, right? He didn't let us know where he was going. When they found him, they said, hey, everyone is looking for you. That was the thing, right? So when they found him, this was their comment, right? Everyone is looking for you. And so my first question is were the disciples impatient that Jesus prayed in solitude while so much ministry waited to be done? Let me rephrase. Let me try to were the disciples impatient that Jesus prayed in solitude while so much ministry waited to be done, do you think? Why do you like? Well, let me just rephrase this completely. It made sense when I wrote it down, but now it's not when I say it out loud. Why do you think the apostles are like, "Hey, everyone's looking for you. Why are you doing this?" What do you think? They thought they needed him, maybe. I don't know. It's kind of those things. Like sometimes, it was one of those things that maybe I saw more often. Like especially watching Dad grow up, or growing, watching Dad as a minister growing up. It's like, it was like, well, how dare you go and do something for yourself, right? It's like, how dare you go and have time for you? You're supposed to be helping all these people, and so I think that's kind of some of this. Like, hey, we're all looking for you. You need to be available 24/7 almost. It's like we need to know where you're at all the time. And I think it's important that we do make sure that I think this happens in our everyday lives. Like anytime, a lot of times, it seems like if you're going to try to, I need some alone time. I need some time to pray with God, right? It seems like everything in the world is going to come up at that time, And so I think that's the devil playing into it. And so what's funny is if we go into verse 38, right? Jesus didn't even answer his question, which is, I'm sorry, it wasn't really a question, it was a statement. But Jesus really didn't even respond to it. And that was honestly, if you go through and look at a lot of Jesus's MO, a lot of times someone would either say something to him or ask him a question. And a lot of the times he wouldn't even respond to what they asked or said. He would just go in a completely different direction because I think he understood. Obviously, he knew their heart. He knew where they were coming from, and so I think a lot of it had to do with he knew where they were really coming from, why they said what they said, and it wasn't necessarily like, oh well, how dare you? It's we need to be going, we need to be getting ready, and so Jesus then replies to him and says, "We must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. That is why I came." Right? He's like, Peter or Simon at that time was like, "Hey, everyone's looking for you." And Jesus is like, "Okay, well, we got work to do. Let's go." I'm trying to rest and leave me alone or anything like that. He just explained, "Okay, let's go. Let's go." And so, how would you have responded if you'd been the one to find Jesus in prayer? How do you think? If you were the one who went out looking for him, and would you have been like, "Hey, everyone's looking for you. What are you doing?" Expecting him to come on? I don't know. I like to think that I'd be like, "Okay, I'm going to give him, I see what he's doing. I'll give him some time, But I'm probably more like Simon than I like to admit, or Peter than I like to admit. And so I probably would have been like, "Hey, man, what are you doing wasting time? We got to go."
They obviously saw Jesus pray, but I don't think there was a lot of individual prayer in the Jewish religion.
That's true.
So I don't think it was. I think that was fairly new.
That's true.
Like now,
Yeah, I'm not going to interrupt them. I'm not going, "Hey, what are you doing?" That's a good point. That is a good point. I don't know what they're. And typically, a lot of times when in Old Testament prayer types, it was a very obvious. Right, it was you lay yourself out type of typical prayer sometimes that you would see, and he may have just been sitting there, just sitting on a log, I mean, it's just and so, but yeah, I don't know how I would respond. Like I like to because obviously I have all this that I've read and I see everything, and and so I like to think that I would do better than the apostles, but I'd probably do a lot worse, and so I think we see that. And so one of the things that I put in here for the notes and stuff is I think one of the things that we may need to do, going back to what Jesus did here is maybe redesign our schedules a little bit. This is something I'm attempting to do, is I'm trying to reduce the noise, right? There's a lot of just noise. And if you're like, some of you may not be like me, I don't know. but you have like 300 apps on your phones, and every one of them sends you notifications, and you're signed up to get emails from everything from Burger King to Olive Garden to Best Buy to if you've ever bought it, and so one of the things that I've tried to do this starting in January was just like unsubscribe from everything. All right, like don't send me any more emails. I don't want any more emails. I don't. Yes, few things so I get as few interruptions as possible. I try to turn off all the notifications. There's a couple apps that I leave on because some of them work related, some of them church related, stuff like that. But it's like I need to drown out the noise. But one of the other things I'm trying to do a better job of is get up earlier. And some of y'all it's a little bit easier than or harder than others, and just spend a little bit more time in the Word and in prayer, and those type of things. I think if we can get away from the noise, and the demandings and be able to focus on God, I think that helps us a whole lot. I mean, again, like I said, if Jesus had to do it, then we definitely should be doing it. We should definitely be doing it probably a lot more than he did. Kyle. Yeah. I honestly, I would think, and I mean, I'm not going to say because it doesn't say exactly what he, the only prayer that we see from Jesus is when he tells us how to pray, which was the Lord's Prayer in the Sermon on the Mount. So I think the one thing that I would say more than anything, he probably just had conversation with God. I would think. Like I would think he would sit down. I mean, you got to look at his ministry and see where he was going. He probably, I mean, maybe he prayed and said, "Hey, where do you want me to go next?" Where, those kind of things. I mean, maybe it was that kind of stuff, or maybe it was just prayer for strength. And maybe it was probably, honestly, a lot of the things we might even pray for today. I think when we sit down and spend, because again, he was human. He may have had some of the same doubts we have. He may have struggled with a lot of the same things that we had, and so he might have just needed that closeness with God. Amber.
It was right after he was like you have to go on other towns as well. But like he didn't separate market there.
Yeah.
Wait for nobody to teach him anymore. It was like he had the wisdom or the discernment that it's time to move on, even if people still need us here.
Yep.
Like it's time to move on. And I think it's interesting that it's like I think like even when I don't know, it's like you want to really have to compare if there's anything that we all have.
Yeah. Well, you kind of think about that. I mean, I imagine myself, if I had the power to heal people, and to heal, like to be able to heal and do everyone, and obviously you had the heart of God as well, right? I mean, the human nature side would probably corrupt that, or would corrupt it, not probably. And so it would be tempting to be like, oh, I got to stay here until I get like everything and everyone. And it's like, no, I have to move on. And because yeah.
Just because it's like so much like in-house stuff, or then like we have to go on. That's why it's
Yeah.
spread in other areas.
Yep.
So,
I wonder too if maybe Peter's or Simon's, reference there was, hey, this town's looking for you, or the people in this town, everyone there, like they're, and he's like, and maybe Jesus is like, hey, it's time for us to move on to the next one, and so yeah, that's a good perspective.
To heal the lame or whatever, but he did it to show the power of God. So
Yeah.
It's not like he needed to heal everybody in town.
Yeah, that wasn't his.
It wasn't his mission.
No, his mission was to prove or show that God was here. The Savior was here. But yeah, if his job was to heal and take care of everything on the whole earth, then he'd still be here. he'd still be working on it. And so I think this is where we can learn to adapt Jesus' attitude of regular communion with the Father. Like I talked about earlier when we do this. This is why we do this every Sunday. It is important to spend, and I've used this analogy before, all right? If you just talk to your wife once a week, how good of a relationship are you going to have? Guys, don't say good. Some people might say, oh, really good one. But I mean, realistically, any type of relationship, if you talk to someone once a week, if Craig and Amber only talk to each other once a week, they're not going to have a very good relationship. Like, they're not going to be very close. They're not going to, I mean, and so that's why it's important. If we're going to have a good relationship with Christ, if we're going to have a good relationship with God, then we need to be in His Word, talking to Him on a regular basis. And so that's the what we see here. And so that's where I determine. And so reflect on our priorities that Jesus has on our life, and determine to pray on a more regular basis. I think, and it doesn't have to be. This is like, I think it is important that you get away on a regular basis, right? Into solitude, turn your phone off, or put your phone in another room, take your Apple Watch off, or whatever, or put yourself in Do Not Disturb, however you want to do it, right? And go and get away. I think the New Testament a lot of times describe people going into the most inner room, or to like the closet, right? And like closing the door and praying that way. Because that way, we need that type of time with Christ. We need that type of time with God to get away. Now, I think the other side of it too is just to be on regular conversation, that regular just talking to God. Right? You're driving down the road, asking God. I think that's important too. Those type of relationships. So I think there's different types of prayers. There's times where we need to get away and have solitude, but there's also just in our everyday life, just continue to have that conversation with God. Now, if you just walk around talking to yourself out loud and do that and everyone sees it, might think you're crazy, but no, I mean, even if it's a dialogue in our head, or just driving down the road, or I see a lot of that. I do that. It's like I'm driving, and I'll talk to God about things like that and pray, and I think that's the type of prayer and relationship that we had. Any comments, questions before I move on to the last bit of this? All right. So then we see in verse 39, right? He says, right, we must go into other towns, and this is something I'll mention just briefly as well, and I will preach to them. That is why I came, right? His main reason is to come, like Adam just mentioned. His main reason for coming is to preach. Now he does heal, he does do those things because if he just showed up and didn't do anything, then a lot of people, he would have had a lot less followers probably. Because, there was a lot of people back in that day who claimed to be either some form of God, some type of God, or some type of deity, but he backed it up. He's like, yeah, this is who I am, and he backed it up. And so it says he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. Now, this area where he was at in Galilee, and we talked about this when we first started Mark, he spent like 80 to 90% of his ministry in this area. This was the main area that he started, and it was like 30 to, all total, like his whole area that he covered was like less than 100 and 150 miles from one area to the other. And so it was a very small area if you think about how small of an area he actually ministered in. But the main area in Galilee, which he ministered in, had about 250 towns that were concentrated in that area. And so it's going to take him a little bit of time to hit. And I assume, and this is an assumption here, I assume he hit most of these towns or these areas in his ministry. Now, not every single one of them is mentioned, obviously, because John wrote about it. If we wrote all the things that he did throughout his ministry, the books of the world couldn't contain it all, right? And so he probably hit almost every single one of these towns. He traveled around and did this. And so this is what he was doing. This is why word of him spread so fast, because of everything. And he got such a large following. And so, but the main thing I want us to see for us, right, to apply to ourselves, is that prayer and time with God is very, very important. And in our busy world, our very noisy world that we live in today, it's easy to get distracted and not do that the way we should. And so if we're going to follow God's example, then we need to do that. And the other important thing that we see here is he definitely did this because he knew he was going out, right? Before we start going out and trying to preach or teach people or talk to people about Christ, make sure that we talk to God first about it. Right? Help get guidance from God. Help spend that time with God, and I think that's going to help us a whole lot more too when we go to sit down and spend time with God and go to sit down with others. All right, so then we see in Mark 1, 40 through 45, and I'll get through this one. I'll read all 5 verses and then we'll hit the notes, right? So Mark 1, verse 40 through 45. A man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. If you were willing, mark that if you're in your Bibles or whatever. That's a really good statement. I'll come back to it. If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean, he said. Moved with compassion. This is another area that we're going to look at as well. Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing, he said, be healed. Now, this is another important thing, too. He touched him. And we're going to look at why that was important. It says, instantly the leprosy disappeared. The man was healed. Then Jesus sent him on his way with a stern warning. He says, don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest, let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public statement that you have been cleansed. But the man went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. As a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus, and he couldn't publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay out in the secluded spaces, but people from everywhere kept coming to him. And so, what does anyone in here real familiar with leprosy? Yeah. I mean, we don't see it, right? It's not something that that's very common. I meant to look up the cases in the United States in the last 100 years, and I think it's probably less than 10. It's low. I remember reading about a case. I think it was in Texas or something. I think armadillos carry them, can carry it, but it's a very rare thing to see in the world today. But back then, leprosy was horrible. It was a horrible, and it was one of those things that once you got it, it was a life altering. Basically, you were secluded. If anyone's ever seen pictures of it, if you got a strong stomach, you want to look it up, you can. But basically, what it does is it causes your flesh basically to turn black and your limbs, like I remember as a kid, they would say, "Oh, it causes your skin to fall off or your limbs to fall off and all that kind of stuff." And it wasn't like you just walked around and your arm fell off, right? It was a slow thing where it would slowly eat at your fingers. It'd start at the digits and stuff like that. They would fall off, then your hand fall off, and it would just kind of eat away, turn black, that kind of stuff. And so it was a very social, isolating disease. Like you were isolated from society. Most towns had little areas outside the towns where the people had to stay. Right, and if you did go into town, you were required to while you were walking, around to announce to everyone that you were unclean. Right? You ever seen the videos of the people walking their dogs and they're not friendly, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like the person had to walk around and say, "Hey, I am unclean." They let everyone know that I'm unclean, I'm dirty, and so rocks would be thrown at them. And so it was a horrible disease, not only from the physical aspect of it, right, but from the mental side of it as well. You get something like that that's causing that to happen to you. You imagine what the toll that takes on you physically, but imagine the emotional and the mental toll that it takes walking around with something and having to announce it to everyone. How would y'all feel if every time you got sick, you had to walk around the halls or walk around and be like, "I got the flu," and you just yelled it through the halls of your work, or you've got, or anything else, stuff like that. And so that's what that looked like. And so the first thing I like about this, right, this man goes to Jesus, and this was what I loved about that. And I think this is the reason these stories, because I think there's a lot of these stories that we see in the New Testament. A lot of them we probably didn't get written down, but the very first thing he says to him, "If you are willing." He didn't say "if you can." He knew he could. He's like, "I know you can do this." He's like, "If you're willing to do it." And so you can heal me and make me clean. He didn't ask him. It was a statement of, if you're willing, I know you can do this and I know you can make me clean. And so what we see here from Jesus, this word here, was he was moved with compassion. Now, the Greek word, I'm not going to try to read this word, it looks like a weird version of spaghetti in Greek. And so I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because it's like 15 characters long. But it literally means that the compassion that Jesus had here, it literally means to be moved as to one's bowels, right? You've ever seen something or felt something that's like a gut punch, right? Like you can just feel it. And so that's kind of the description, the compassion that Jesus had. He had such compassion for this man that it moved him just moved his stomach, right? It caught him in the stomach. And so that's how it's used. And it's only used in the Bible, in the Gospels. It's only used 12 times, this Greek word, and it's only used to describe the compassion that Jesus had for people. So basically, it was one of these things that it moved him so much, right? And it's not used to describe that anyone else had this sort of compassion for people. And so we see that Jesus had this sort of compassion to people. And then he reaches out, and this is another very important thing, and he touched him. He didn't have to do that. He could have said, okay, you're healed, and walked away. But he reached out and he touched him to show the compassion that he had for him. Because in that day, you were not, I mean, just for your own personal safety, you didn't touch someone who had leprosy because it could spread. And so it wasn't a mean thing. It wasn't a hateful thing. Now, the Pharisees went further with it, with Jewish law, because then you were considered unclean as well. And so not only would you not touch someone who had leprosy or disease like that, because you could get it, but under Jewish law, you weren't to do it either, because again, you were considered unclean and you had to go through all these ceremonies and stuff like that. So there was several reasons why you wouldn't do that. But Jewish law required that, from Leviticus 13 and 14, Jewish law required that if someone was healed of leprosy, they had to go to the priest. The priest was trained in being able to identify whether someone was healed of leprosy or not. And then the priest would declare whether you were healed or unclean, or healed from your leprosy. And so we see here again instantly that the leprosy disappeared. But I want us to focus on this section right here, right? How much compassion that Jesus was moved with, that he was willing to, again, go against the laws of the land, go against what normal people would do, and show the compassion to touch this man, even though he knew in society that it would have been looked down upon, right? Because, well, you shouldn't touch someone that's unclean, or, it's just because he had that compassion. And we see that regularly, that Jesus takes the time to have that close contact with people, right? He doesn't heal people from a distance. Now, there's a couple times where, he tells people to go and heal, and as they're going, they get healed. But most of the times when you see Jesus heal someone, it's because he actually takes the time to touch them and become close with them. He doesn't, he doesn't do mass healings or anything like that. He does one-on-one time, spends one-on-one time with people and does that. And so we see that. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Honestly, the only thing I can think, and this is kind of my thought, is I think there was a lot of corrupt religious, well, we know, it was, I think, there was a lot of corrupt religious people in that day, right? And there were also people who were healers, right, in that day, that you would pay them, right? Or you would, and so I think, yeah, we go doctors today. I think that it was maybe it was a little bit of just some of that, like, if you're willing to do this, I don't know. Like I don't go ahead. Right. Yeah. 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 And I think so. And maybe part of it too, it goes down to this. Maybe this man just had the faith. Like, I mean, because obviously I mean, if you look at that, he's like, he said, if it were, you can heal me. Right. I mean, it wasn't, I think you might be able to, or, it was, I know you can. And so maybe that was part of the reason why Jesus was moved with such compassion too. Obviously, because he probably saw the condition that this guy was in, but maybe the faith that came with it. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a lot of big stuff with Jesus where he was, I don't want to say amazed, but impressed by their faith. Like, garment
Yeah.
in a crowd.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that, I mean, and is it the centurion where I think, I can't wait if it's Luke or Matthew that wrote that Jesus was like, I think the Greek word there was amazed or kind of in awe of how much faith this person had. And because even comments, I was like, you're not going to find this great of faith in all of Israel. Yeah. Yep.
Jesus was known at this point. It's not like, ministry.
Yeah. And maybe it was just a humble approach too, right? He could have been like, I know you can't heal me, so you have to heal me, but and maybe it's like, hey, I want to come to this guy because I know he can. I have faith that he can. And so it's like, I'm going to come in a humble way. It's like, if you will, right? If you will, would, kind of like a please type thing. Mindy, sorry, I know I've been ignoring you. I Yeah. And that could have been part of it too. That's a good point, right? They were considered such low of lows that maybe it was like, okay, if you're willing to actually even, consider it. And it doesn't, like we see that Jesus had healed people, right? Well, last week we looked at it. It doesn't mention all the diseases. It does say he cast out demons, that kind of stuff. But I think this is the first time leprosy is mentioned. And so that could have been part of it too, is he the way he had been treated so bad, probably by society and stuff like that. There was probably that element in it as well. It's like, if you're willing to even have anything to do with me, being a leopard, right? Would you heal me as well? I mean, I think all those are good aspects, right? The faith side of it, the all those are really good aspects of it. And then we see, of course, right? This was a regular thing. Jesus tells them, do not tell anyone about this. And he tells a lot of people this, and they don't listen to him. And I understand, right? Because if you were this person and someone healed you of a horrible disease, right, you're going to tell everyone about it, right? Even if he told you not to. Oh. But I think we see, Kyle, I'll get to you in just a second. I think we see why Jesus it wasn't that Jesus didn't want people to know about him. Obviously, he was telling about him. But this is why, right? This is why I think he wanted to keep that on the down low, as we say today, right? Because he couldn't even publicly go to town anywhere. It got to where he couldn't even go into a town. He couldn't get in. He had to stay outside of town because he couldn't go anywhere. And I think that was part of it. Was actually hindering his ministry more than helping it. And so I think that's kind of what he was getting at, and why he was trying to. I think he was trying to slow that snowball down a little bit, right, and keep it from building up so fast. Kyle, you were going to say something? You've asked this question before. Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I knew where he was going, so I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. Is it sin? I personally don't think that this is sin, right? And it's a good question, though, right? Because Jesus has said, hey, do this or don't do this, and he does it anyways. And so it's not that to me, it's not that Jesus is telling this person not to do something because it's bad, right, or it's sinful. It's like a request of, hey, don't do this. And I think it's because he doesn't want it to get out of control like it did. And so I think that was kind of the request that we saw there. Yeah, do me a favor, right? Please don't tell anyone. Keep this quiet. So it wasn't like a direct command of if you disobey me, you're sinning. It was but it's a good question. It is a good question because, as Christians, we're to do everything Jesus asked. So it's a little bit different timing and scenario, but yeah. And so, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And context and timing and all that stuff matters. It does. There's things that we are commanded that we are to do, right? And we should do. There's things that Jesus talked about and said and did that were commands for his apostles, right? That we don't really have to listen to as much. There may be good guidance. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I can't. I know there's some out there. But there's different types of things that we see people or commands or things that we see Jesus ask, and this is one of them, right? He asked this guy not to say anything. He didn't it wasn't a direct command. It wasn't if you disobey me, you're sinning. It was I like how Evelyn said it, right? It says, "Do me a favor," and I like that, and so I think that's yeah, yep. And his mom ignored him and said, "Do it anyways." So, all right. Like I said, today's was a little bit shorter, just the way that these fall. Any thoughts, comments, questions before we go into our invitation song? All right. I appreciate it. I hope y'all are enjoying this. I like studying the Bible this way. I like going through it this way, and I think it's helpful. But as always, right? If y'all have anything, if anyone has any prayers, I'm going to play our invitation song. Y'all can sing along if you want to. If you want to just listen, I like for y'all to take this time to reflect, to think, to pray, and just spend a little bit of time, kind of looking through and reflecting what we've talked about today, or just reflecting on some things that you have in your life. So we'll listen to this, and then I'll close us out in prayer.